Luke Morgan had reached his lowest point. His last $70 had vanished, spent on a storage unit containing nothing but mildewed refuse and hopelessness. He collapsed onto the cold concrete, a vanquished veteran prepared to surrender. But his dog, Kaiser, would not comply. The German shepherd, disregarding his master's command, moved to the unit's rear wall. He began to scratch, whimpering urgently at a particular spot on the stained plywood. This was not the excited scratching of a dog pursuing rodents. It was purposeful, persistent, and deliberate. Frustrated, Luke went to pull Kaiser away, but then he froze. He saw what Kaiser had uncovered. The water stains on the wall. They weren't mere stains. They were perfectly straight geometric lines. That wasn't a wall. It was a door. Please support us by subscribing to our channel. The cold in Pittsburgh was more than just a temperature. It was an oppressive physical burden. It descended from the iron-gray sky, radiated from the frozen asphalt, and ascended from the banks of the Monongahela River, carrying the scent of ice and antiquated industry. Luke Morgan felt it in the scar tissue of his left knee, a dull ache that synchronized with his breathing. He sat huddled against a concrete pylon, sheltered from the worst of the wind, yet not from the dampness that seemed embedded within the cement itself. He was a man with a tall, slender build, but the layers of worn clothing softened his contours. A faded brown leather jacket, cracked and stiff from years of exposure, was pulled tightly over a flannel shirt. His face was obscured by a rough, uneven beard, and his brown hair, grown long and disheveled, was streaked with silver at the temples. He appeared older than his 41 years, his features etched by adversity, yet his eyes held a profound, quiet kindness that seemed incongruous with the bleak landscape. Pressed against his right side, absorbing and returning warmth, was Kaiser. Kaiser was a 7-year-old German shepherd with a thick coat of muted gray and white that appeared almost ethereal in the dim light. He was a large dog, powerful through the shoulders and deep in the chest, but his demeanor was one of profound tranquility. His intelligent amber-colored eyes observed the slow-moving traffic on the overpass above, his ears twitching at the whine of tires on the icy road. But his body remained relaxed, a living anchor tethered to Luke. Luke's gaze was fixed on the river, but he was not seeing the ice flows. He was elsewhere entirely, pulled under by a sound that had pierced the air moments before. A city bus on the bridge above had engaged its brakes, producing a sharp, pressurized hiss, the sound of failing hydraulics. He was no longer beneath a bridge in Pittsburgh. He was in the dry heat of a forward operating base, the air thick with dust and the stench of diesel. He saw Dean. Dean with his boisterous laugh and the photograph of his wife and new daughter taped to his dashboard. They were supposed to be inspecting the winch on the recovery vehicle. The hiss, the sudden terrible snap of the cable, the catastrophic failure of the lift mechanism. Luke hadn't been close enough to be injured, only close enough to watch, helpless, as the multi-ton vehicle component slipped, crushing Dean instantly. But that wasn't the memory that truly tormented him. The death was a tragedy, sudden and violent, the kind soldiers are compelled to anticipate. The chilling anchor that held Luke at the bottom of the river was what followed. It was the memory of a sterile room, the scent of industrial floor cleaner, and the face of his superior, Captain Alex Hunter. Alex Hunter was a man with a chiseled jaw and eyes that held no light. A man who perceived the world in terms of acceptable losses and protected assets. Luke, still in shock, had submitted his report. Faulty hydraulics, substandard parts. He had mentioned the other complaints, the ones that had been disregarded. Hunter had listened, his expression unchanged. Then he had produced his own report. Operator error, it stated. "Sir," Luke had protested, his voice hoarse. "Music, the ground was unstable, sir." "The ground was fine, Morgan," Hunter had asserted, his voice quiet but absolute. "Your report is mistaken. It was a tragic accident caused by Dean's failure to follow safety protocols. That is the official finding. But, sir, the hydraulics? The contract with that supplier is vital to our operational readiness. Hunter had interjected, his eyes turning to ice. We will not jeopardize that over a single unfortunate incident. You are dismissed, Sergeant. Luke had stood there, his insides turning to stone. Dean was buried, and so was the truth. It was a cover-up, plain and simple, designed to protect a lucrative government contract. The system he had sworn his life to, the honor he had built himself around, had evaporated in that sterile room. He had lost his faith, not to an enemy bullet, but to a signature on a false report. His discharge, which came 6 months later, felt less like an ending and more like a descent, and he had been falling ever since. A low whine drew Luke back to the present. Kaiser had shifted, nudging his cold nose insistently under Luke's glove. The dog's eyes were fixed on him, full of a patient understanding that requested nothing but presence. "I'm here, boy," Luke murmured, his voice rough. He stroked the dog's thick fur. "I'm okay." He was lying. The meager shelter they had maintained under the bridge was no longer secure. A white municipal truck had pulled up earlier, and a man in a thick city-issued coat had approached them. He wasn't unkind, just firm. "Fellas, I'm sorry," the man said, looking at Luke and then at the dog. "New directive. We've got to clear this area. Liability. You can't stay here." Luke had simply nodded, the familiar shame washing over him. He knew how to follow orders. He packed his few belongings, a sleeping bag, a small cookpot, a tarp into the shopping cart that held his life. Now, with the sun beginning to dip and the temperature dropping rapidly, they were exposed. "Well, Kaiser," Luke said, standing up and stretching his aching knee. "Guess we're moving." Kaiser stood instantly, shaking the frost from his coat. "Ready." Luke pushed the wobbly cart onto the sidewalk, his mind racing. Shelters were full, and most wouldn't accept Kaiser. He would never abandon the dog. They were a single unit. His eyes scanned the skyline across the river. Looming against the fading light like the skeleton of a forgotten giant was the Meridian Steel Works. The steel mill had been shuttered since the late 1980s, a massive monument to a defunct industry. It was acres of rusting metal, broken glass, and concrete canyons. It was also, Luke knew, incredibly dangerous and strictly off-limits. Locals avoided it, believing it haunted by the spirits of displaced workers. But it was a roof. It took them nearly an hour to cross the bridge and navigate the crumbling service roads that led to the mill's perimeter. The chain-link fence was high, but time had been kind to them. Near a collapsed loading dock, a section of the fence had rusted through at the bottom, leaving a gap just wide enough to slip through. Luke pushed the cart as far as he could, then unfastened his pack and the sleeping bag. He would have to leave the cart behind. He and Kaiser slipped through the gap into the profound, echoing silence of the dead factory. The main foundry floor was a graveyard of machinery. Moonlight slanted through the shattered skylights, illuminating hulking, silent shapes. It was colder inside than it had been on the street, the metal radiating a deep, penetrating chill. "This way," Luke whispered, more to himself than to the dog. Kaiser moved beside him, silent as a shadow, his head high and alert. Luke remembered this place from a brief, desperate scouting mission months ago. He bypassed the main floor, heading toward a smaller, separate structure he had seen near the old administrative block. He found it, a small brick building set apart from the main works. The sign above the door, barely legible, read, "Security Office." The wooden door was thick, and the lock had been broken long ago, but the door itself was still on its hinges. Luke pushed it open with the sound of grinding, rusted metal. Inside, it was pitch black. Luke fumbled for the small flashlight on his keychain. The beam cut through decades of dust. It was a single room, perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet. A heavy steel desk sat against one wall, a moldering chair beside it, But the window, though filmed with grime, was not broken. The roof miraculously seemed intact. The floor was concrete, littered with dead leaves that had blown in under the door, but it was dry. It was safe. Luke dropped his pack against the wall and let out a breath he felt he had been holding since morning. The air was stale, smelling of plaster and decay, but it was still. Kaiser sniffed every corner of the small room, his claws making soft clicking sounds on the concrete. Finally, he returned to the pack, circled twice, and lay down with a heavy sigh, resting his head on his paws, his eyes closing. He was home. Luke sat on the floor, his back against the cold wall, and placed a hand on Kaiser's flank. The dog was his anchor, the only thing that kept him from drifting away completely. Here, in the frozen heart of the Meridian Steelworks, they had found a small, cold harbor. The security office at the Meridian Steelworks was a refuge, but it was not a home. When the weak gray light of morning filtered through the grime-caked window, it unveiled the stark reality of their situation. The shelter was dry, but it was as cold inside as it was out. Luke woke stiffly, his bones aching. Kaiser was already awake, sitting patiently, his breath pluming in the frigid air. The dog's intelligent eyes were fixed on Luke, his tail unmoving. It was a look Luke knew well. It was hunger. Luke's stomach clenched in response. He reached for his pack and checked their supplies. The inventory was grim. Half a bag of kibble for Kaiser and the lingering end of a bread loaf for himself. He possessed $73 and some loose change, tucked into a small plastic bag within his pocket. This represented the remainder of his disability payment from 2 weeks prior. It was insufficient to secure lodging and barely enough to sustain him for a few additional days, yet it was too substantial to disregard. He recalled a damp flyer he had collected at a bus stop days earlier, an advertisement he had briefly noted and then dismissed. He retrieved the crumpled paper from his jacket pocket. Pine Ridge Storage, it declared. Delinquent unit auction. Cash only. This was a desperate gamble. He recognized that these auctions were often long shots, predominantly attended by seasoned professionals. However, he also understood that occasionally individuals discovered valuable items, tools, furniture, anything, that could be sold for a modest profit. Enough to acquire another bag of dog food and provisions for another week. "What do you think, boy?" Luke murmured, presenting the flyer to Kaiser. The dog sniffed the paper and sneezed. "It's a chance. It's the only one we've got." He apportioned the last of the kibble to Kaiser and consumed the stale bread. He secured the small office as best he could, and they ventured back into the freezing city. The Pine Ridge storage facility was situated on the industrial periphery of the South Side, an expansive complex of identical gray buildings adorned with bright blue roll-up doors. A modest crowd of approximately 20 individuals had gathered near the main office, most of them men with pickup trucks and vacant cargo vans. They appeared warm, professional, and self-assured. Luke, clad in his worn leather jacket with Kaiser at his side, immediately felt out of place. He tightened his collar and remained at the rear of the group. A man wearing a bright orange vest over a heavy coat emerged, holding a clipboard. This was Mason Lee, the auctioneer. He possessed a rapid, rhythmic voice that pierced the cold air, a voice that wasted no time on pleasantries. "All right, folks, welcome to Pine Ridge. You know the rules. You look, you don't touch. Cash only. Due immediately. You win it. You have 48 hours to clear it to the floor. Let's get started." He gestured to a worker who cut the lock on the first unit. The metal door rattled as it ascended. Luke observed for the next hour as his hope diminished. The professionals worked swiftly. They would illuminate the units with powerful flashlights, make nearly instantaneous assessments, and the bidding would commence. A unit filled with what appeared to be antique furniture went for $800. Another, packed with tools and machinery, reached $1,200. Luke did not even bother to watch. He simply stroked Kaiser's head, feeling the warmth of the dog's fur beneath his glove, and attempted to ignore the growing abyss of failure in his stomach. Finally, Mason Lee moved to the very last unit in the row, separate from the others. All right, folks, last one for the day. Unit 412. Tenant delinquent 9 months. Looks like a backload. We're cutting the lock now. A worker snapped the robust padlock with bolt cutters. The sound was sharp and conclusive. Mason Lee and the worker both exerted themselves to hoist the rattling door upward. It stuck, then sprang open with a groan of protesting metal. The professionals shone their lights inside, held their gaze for less than 10 seconds, and then scoffed. One by one, they turned and began to walk back toward their trucks. "Okay, folks, what do we have here?" Mason Lee chanted, attempting to maintain momentum. Luke stepped forward to examine what the others had rejected. Unit 412 was a quagmire. It was 10 feet deep and crammed with sagging cardboard boxes, their sides dark and soft with mildew. A broken floor lamp lay on its side. Black plastic trash bags were stacked in one corner. Some had split open, revealing stained, moldy clothing. The odor that emanated from the unit was a nauseating blend of damp paper, decay, and age. It was utterly worthless. "Let's start the bidding at $50, Mason Lee called out to the retreating crowd. No one turned. $50 for the whole lot. Come on, folks, help me clear the lot. $20? Do I hear 20? Absolute silence ensued. Mason Lee sighed, annoyed. He surveyed the scene, his eyes settling on the sole person still present. Luke. "You with the dog, $20. It's all yours," Mason said, simply wanting to conclude the auction. Luke's heart was pounding. It was junk, but it was something. He considered the $70 in his pocket. "I'll give you 50, Luke said, his voice surprisingly steady. A man who had been walking away paused. 60, the man called out, likely just for the thrill of it. Luke's stomach tightened. 70, he said, the word escaping faster than he had intended. It was everything. The other man laughed and waved his hand in dismissal. $70 it is, Mason Lee shouted, relieved. Going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman with a dog for $70. Luke advanced, his hand trembling slightly as he extracted the wadded bills from his pocket. He was now utterly broke. Mason Lee took the cash and handed him a carbon copy receipt. "She's all yours. You've got 48 hours to clear it out," Mason said, not unkindly. He glanced at Kaiser. "Good-looking dog. Good luck to you." The auctioneer and the last of the buyers departed. The lot was silent, save for the wind whistling around the corner of the building. It was just Luke, Kaiser, and the black, gaping rectangle of Unit 412. "Well, boy," Luke whispered, his throat dry. "Let's see what we bought." He stepped inside, and the full intensity of the smell assaulted him. It was overwhelming. He pulled his flashlight from his pack and illuminated the area. It was worse than he had imagined. The cardboard boxes were so damp they were disintegrating. When he touched one, it simply collapsed, revealing a sodden mass of old newspapers and magazines fused together into a solid, moldy brick. He spent the next hour digging, his hope transforming into cold, hard despair. There were no tools. There was no furniture save for a three-legged stool and a rusted metal shelf. It was merely the accumulated, forgotten refuse of a life. Moth-eaten blankets, cracked dishes, yellowed paperbacks that fell apart in his hands. It was nothing. He had spent his last $70 on garbage. The weight of his failure pressed down on him more heavily than the Pittsburgh cold. He had failed Kaiser. He had failed himself. He was right back where Alex Hunter had left him. A man whose judgment was worthless. A man who had lost everything. He slid down the wall and sat on the cold concrete floor, burying his face in his gloves. He felt the old familiar shadow of his trauma enfold him. He was roused from the darkness by a sound, a persistent whining, scratching noise. He looked up. Kaiser was at the very back of the small 10-foot-deep unit. The back wall was covered in a single large, cheap-looking sheet of plywood, stained and peeling. Kaiser was standing on his hind legs, his nose pressed firmly against the wood, sniffing intently. He whined again, then dropped to all fours and began to scratch at the base of the panel. "Kaiser, stop!" Luke commanded, his voice tired and empty. "Leave it. It's just rats, boy. There's nothing back there for us." Kaiser paused, looked back at Luke, and then turned and scratched again, harder this time, emitting a low, insistent huff. This was not the excited scratch of chasing prey. It was focused. It was deliberate. Luke sighed and pushed himself to his feet, his knee protesting. He owed the dog his attention. All right, I see it. What is it?" He walked to the back of the unit, the beam of his flashlight playing over the plywood. He gently pushed Kaiser aside. "What have you got, boy?" He examined the panel where Kaiser had been scratching. It was just damp, cheap wood. But as he shone the light upward, he noticed what his mind had dismissed earlier. The water stains. They did not spread and bloom outward like normal water damage from a leak. Oh, they were perfectly straight. 2 long vertical lines of discoloration running from the ceiling to the floor about 3 feet apart. Luke ran his fingers along the stains. They weren't stains. They were seams. He realized he wasn't looking at one solid sheet of plywood. It was a section deliberately fitted between 2 other panels. And Kaiser wasn't just scratching at rats. The dog had smelled something different. A draft of air coming from the gap. Luke pressed his hand against the panel. It was loose. It shifted slightly under his weight. This wasn't a structural wall. Luke's heart gave a single hard jolt. He looked around the junk-filled unit, and his eyes landed on a rusted tire iron half buried under a pile of rags. He grabbed it, returned to the wall, and wedged the flat end into the seam that Kaiser had found. The tire iron felt cold and heavy in Luke's gloved hand. He jammed the flat end into the thin seam Kaiser had exposed, putting his shoulder into it. The plywood was damp and soft, giving way easily. He heard a dull tearing sound as the wood fibers ripped, followed by the faint protest of old nails pulling free. He pried the panel back, the bottom edge scraping against the concrete, and it fell forward with a soft thud into the dust of the storage unit. Kaiser, vindicated, pushed his nose into the opening, sniffing the rush of cold, stale air that escaped from the darkness. Luke dropped the tire iron and aimed his flashlight into the hole. It was exactly as the straight seams had suggested. A false wall. Behind it lay a narrow, dark void, a man-made gap between the plywood and the true concrete block wall of the unit. The space was no more than 2 feet deep, an intentional, carefully constructed hiding place, and it was not empty. Luke's breath caught. The beam of his light, cutting through the thick, swirling dust motes, landed on 3 objects sitting neatly on the concrete floor of the hidden space. They were not tossed in. They had been placed. His heart, which had been a cold stone of despair moments before, began a low, heavy drumbeat. He knelt, telling Kaiser to stay, and reached into the cramped void. The initial object his fingers encountered was a diminutive wooden container. It possessed a dark hue, perhaps mahogany, and felt smooth to the touch, roughly the dimensions of a substantial paperback. Its lightness was unexpected. Next was a hefty manila folder brimming with documents. It was rigid, and its flap was sealed, not with adhesive, but with a thick, foreboding circular imprint of dark red wax, bearing an emblem he couldn't decipher in the subdued illumination. The seal remained intact. Positioned at the very back was the third item, necessitating a stretch to reach. It was a metallic case. Not a mere storage box, it resembled a military-grade ammunition crate, painted in a matte black finish. It weighed a considerable amount, and as he maneuvered it forward, he noticed 3 premium combination tumbler locks securing its lid. Luke extracted the trio of items from the recess and positioned them on the unit's grimy floor, scrutinizing them intently. The refuse bags, the mildewed periodicals, the $70 blunder all receded into insignificance. This was far from refuse. This was a guarded secret. Kaiser whimpered softly, pressing his head against Luke's arm, sensitive to the abrupt surge in his tension. "It's all right, boy," Luke murmured, his voice. "I'm unsure what this is, but you discovered it. You discovered it." His immediate inclination was to open them right then and there, but a chilling jolt of realization traversed his spine. The unit door stood wide open. He was exposed. The facility owner possessed his name on a receipt. This was not the opportune location. He observed the metal case. The 3 locks conveyed an unambiguous message. "Keep out." He then glanced at the wooden box, yet it was the wax-sealed folder that captivated his attention. It hinted at revelations. "We're heading back," Luke declared, his tone resolute. He swiftly repacked his meager provisions. He nestled the small wooden box and the sealed folder deep within his backpack. The metal case was too bulky. He encased it in his own sleeping bag, foregoing his personal warmth for its concealment, and tucked the bundle beneath his arm. Its weight was substantial, but the adrenaline coursing through him rendered it manageable. He abstained from inspecting the remaining contents of the unit. He was utterly convinced that he had already unearthed everything of value. He lowered the rolling door until it was merely a foot from the ground, just enough for them to slip out, then kicked the plywood panel back into position to obscure the opening. It wouldn't withstand scrutiny, but it would conceal the void from a casual glance. The journey back to the Meridian Steelworks was an indistinct blur of heightened vigilance. Each passing vehicle, every distant siren, caused the muscles in his neck to tauten. The weight of the box beneath his arm served as a persistent, perilous reminder. Kaiser, too, was on alert, walking in a precise, protective heel, his ears erect and swiveling, sensing Luke's apprehension. When they finally slipped back through the compromised fence and into the cavernous stillness of the steel mill, Luke experienced a fleeting sense of relief. He navigated the debris-strewn floor back to the modest brick security office, their cold, arid sanctuary. He propelled the door shut, wedging the broken chair beneath the knob. A futile gesture, yet it instilled a greater sense of security. He sat on the floor, Kaiser immediately settling behind him, a warm, living sentinel. Luke activated his flashlight and propped it against the rusted desk, directing the beam at the floor. He unwrapped the metal box and placed it aside. The locks were insurmountable. He retrieved the wooden box, running his thumb over its smooth lid. It felt like a container for photographs or correspondence. Finally, he grasped the thick manila folder. He held it for an extended moment. The red wax seal was brittle with age. He took a deep breath, the frigid air stinging his lungs, and broke the seal with his thumb. It produced a dry, fragile snapping sound that reverberated in the tiny, silent room. He extracted a stack of folded papers. The topmost page was a letter handwritten in faint, spidery blue ink. The penmanship was unsteady, the loops and cross strokes indicative of someone writing under immense duress. Luke angled the flashlight and began to read. "My name is Theodore Lawson. If you are reading this, I am dead." Luke's blood ran cold. "I have lived in fear for 29 years. I am a coward, and I pray God has mercy on my soul. But I cannot go to my grave without leaving this. I cannot let the truth die with me. What I have hidden here is the truth about my brother Jonathan Lawson. John, he was a good man, the best of us. He was murdered." Luke ceased reading, his heart pounding against his ribs. He looked at the black metal box. Murdered. He returned to the letter, his eyes scanning the page more rapidly. It was 1996. John was an activist, a man who believed in doing the right thing. He found out about a cover-up, a terrible one. It involved men with more power than I have ever known. Men who could make people disappear. John was going to go to the press. He had proof. He told me. I begged him not to. I told him to think of his family, of his little girl. But he was brave, braver than I ever was. They staged an accident at his office, a gas leak, an explosion. The investigation was closed in a week. Tragic, the papers said. It was not a tragedy. It was an execution. I knew it. And they knew I knew it. I was terrified. I took his proof, everything he had collected, and I hid it. I ran. I hid his legacy in this hole, and I let them silence me. I let them destroy his name. I was so afraid they would come for me. For his daughter. The metal box contains the proof, the real ledgers, the reports, the photographs. The wooden box holds what is left of his life. Pictures of his daughter, Audrey. I am so sorry, John. I was too weak. I don't know who you are, but I am paying for this storage unit with the last of my money. When I die, the payments will stop, and it will be found. Maybe you are a stranger just looking for treasure. Maybe you are God's answer to my prayer. If you have any courage, any decency, please do what I could not. Do not let John's light go out. Get this to his daughter. Get this to the world. Theodore Theo Lawson. Luke read the letter twice, then a third time. The words blurred. He was no longer in the security office. He was back in that sterile room, the scent of floor cleaner in his nostrils, listening to Alex Hunter's cold, flat voice. Operator error. The contract is vital. It was a cover-up. Luke looked at the black metal box, no longer just a heavy object, but a coffin of truth. He thought of Dean, dead and slandered. He thought of Jonathan Lawson, murdered and forgotten. And he thought of Theodore, a man so broken by fear that he had entombed his brother's legacy in the dark. This wasn't a gamble. It wasn't a mistake. It was a test. He buried his face in his hands, the weight of the discovery settling over him. He had spent his last $70 not on junk, but on a ghost. A ghost that was imploring him to do the one thing he had failed to do for Dean. To retaliate. The single beam of the flashlight transformed the small security office into a prison of stark light and profound shadow. The cold was absolute, a presence that muted sound and slowed thought. Luke sat on the concrete, the shaky handwritten pages of Theo Lawson's confession resting on his knee. Kaiser, perceiving the profound alteration in his human's demeanor, the replacement of despair with a newfound pulsating tension, pressed his substantial body firmly against Luke's back, a silent, warm anchor. Luke reread the letter, and then a third time. He was no longer reading it as an outsider. He was reading it as a witness. The initial page had been the confession. The pages beneath it, which he had barely registered, provided the context. Theo, in his frantic, terrified script, had meticulously unraveled the entire narrative. Jonathan John Lawson was more than just his brother. He was his antithesis. Where Theo was circumspect, John was audacious. Where Theo perceived peril, John identified opportunity, not for financial gain, but for societal improvement. John was an environmental activist, a local idealist who believed that Pittsburgh's industrial blemishes could be ameliorated. In 1995, John Lawson had invested all his resources to acquire this very location, the abandoned Meridian Steelworks. He purchased it because it was contaminated, because it was a blight. His vision was to remediate the land, to cleanse the soil of its toxins, and construct something beneficial for the community. However, he was not the sole individual who coveted the land. The letter identified him as Calvin Bishop. Even Luke, despite his detachment from the city's affairs, had encountered that name. It was emblazoned on the facades of sleek new downtown buildings, on plaques at university centers, and on glossy billboards advertising opulent condominiums. Bishop was a developer, a man who didn't simply construct on the skyline. He owned it. According to Theo's letter, Bishop had desired the Meridian land. He had no intention of cleaning it. He intended to conceal the problem. Bishop's scheme was to erect a colossal shipping depot, capitalizing on the river access. To accomplish this, he required the city to rezone the land from toxic industrial to commercial use. John Lawson unearthed the evidence. Proof of fabricated environmental reports, proof of bribes dispensed to city officials, proof that Bishop intended to build on contaminated ground, a decision that would jeopardize the health of the entire district. John, the idealist, was poised to expose him. The letter, dated 1996, detailed the night of the fire, the gas leak at John's modest office, the investigation that concluded in less than a week, and the official verdict of accidental death. Luke's hand clenched on the paper. Bishop's men came to me after the funeral. Theo wrote. They knew John had kept records. They knew he trusted me. They didn't threaten me with violence. They were polite. They spoke of the future of the city. They spoke of how tragic it would be if John's young daughter, Audrey, were to grow up without an uncle, too. The menace was unequivocal. Terrified, Theo had sworn he possessed no knowledge. Bishop craved the land. The letter continued. As John's sole heir, it was mine. He sent his lawyers. They compelled me to sell. I signed their documents. I accepted their money. But I did one thing. One small, cowardly thing. I retained the original deed, the master title, notarized and filed from when John initially purchased the property. I informed them it had been lost in the fire. I provided them with copies, signed transfers, everything requested, but not the original. I'm unsure if it holds legal significance, but I kept it. It resides in the metal box. The box contains everything. The fabricated permits, the ledgers detailing the bribes, and the genuine deed to this very steel mill. Luke finally comprehended. Bishop had acquired the land through coercion, yet the legal title remained ambiguous. He couldn't fully secure his ownership, which must be why, 3 decades later, the Meridian Steelworks still stood untouched and decaying. It was a monument to a transgression, caught in a legal stalemate. Luke carefully folded the papers and returned them to the folder. He sat in the darkness, the flashlight beam directed at the heavy black metal box. 3 locks. He considered the box, heavy with truth, and his thoughts were torn from the cold office. He was back in the dust, the scent of diesel and the dry, oppressive heat. He saw Dean laughing as he mended the winch. He witnessed the cheap, substandard hydraulics giving way. And he saw Captain Alex Hunter. He heard the voice, cold and final, in the sterile office. The contract is vital. A man's life, Dean's life, his honor, erased to safeguard a contract, to protect a superior's career. Luke gazed at the black box. John Lawson, a decent man, an idealist, murdered. His name slandered as a casualty of his own carelessness, his legacy stolen, all to protect a development deal, to preserve a powerful man's reputation. It was the same narrative. John Lawson was Dean. Calvin Bishop was Alex Hunter. A cold, visceral fury, an emotion Luke hadn't experienced in years, surged within him. It wasn't the explosive anger of his PTSD, but a focused, righteous indignation. He had failed Dean. He had been a sergeant responsible for his men, and he had permitted Alex Hunter to silence him. He had allowed the falsehood to endure. That failure had shattered him, had cost him his career, his faith, and his place in the world. He was a specter haunting the ruins of his own existence. But Theo Lawson's cowardly act had just granted him a second opportunity. This wasn't merely John's battle. It was his. It was the same struggle. The struggle of the powerless against the corrupt. The fight for truth, however burdensome, against the lie, however convenient. He would not fail again. He recalled the final part of the letter, the small wooden box. Pictures of his daughter Audrey, the one Theo was too afraid to protect. Luke picked up the small, smooth wooden box. It wasn't locked. He lifted the lid. Inside, resting on faded velvet, were a few items. A child's drawing of two stick figures holding hands labeled Daddy and Me. A small silver locket and a stack of photographs. He pulled them out. A young man with a kind, bright smile and unruly hair. John Lawson. And in his arms, a little girl with bright eyes and pigtails, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, laughing. Audrey Lawson. She would be a woman now in her 30s. A woman who grew up believing her father died in an accident. A woman who had her legacy, the proof of her father's bravery, stolen from her. Luke Morgan looked at the smiling face in the photograph. He had his new mission. He was no longer just a man trying to survive the winter. He was a sergeant again, and he had his orders. He carefully placed the photos back in the box. He put the box and the sealed folder into his backpack. He looked at the heavy locked metal case. It was the objective. He turned to Kaiser, who had been observing him, head tilted, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The dog emitted a small, quiet whine. "It's okay, boy," Luke said, his voice now different, devoid of despair. "We're done hiding. We have a new mission." He would get that box open, but first he had to find the heir. He had to find Audrey Lawson. The heavy, triple-locked metal box was a palpable weight on Luke's soul. It was the objective, the proof, the entire mission. And he could not, under any circumstances, carry it with him. After a long, restless night in the cold security office, watching the flashlight beam weaken as it rested on the box, Luke made his decision. He was a soldier without a base, a man with a vital piece of intelligence that needed to be secured. He took the metal box, still wrapped in his sleeping bag, and ventured deep into the cavernous main building of the Meridian Steelworks. He moved with practiced stealth, Kaiser padding silently beside him. He found what he was looking for in a collapsed maintenance tunnel. A heavy, rusted iron floor plate. Using the tire iron from the storage unit, he pried it open, revealing a dark, dry crawl space beneath. He placed the box inside, covered it with his sleeping bag, and then replaced the heavy plate, scattering dust and debris over it until it appeared undisturbed. The small wooden box of photos and Theo Lawson's letter, however, he placed at the very bottom of his backpack. Those he would not be separated from. His mission required information, and information required technology. There was only one place in the city that offered it to a man like him, no questions asked. The Carnegie Public Library in Oakland. The journey there was tense. He and Kaiser rode the bus, Kaiser's head resting dutifully on Luke's knee, his presence eliciting a few nervous glances, but no comments. The library, a magnificent palace of sandstone and history, loomed before them, and with it, the first hurdle. A large sign on the ornate bronze doors read, "No animals permitted, service animals only." Kaiser, for all his intelligence and loyalty, was not a registered service animal. Luke's throat tightened. He had not been separated from Kaiser for more than a few minutes in over 2 years. The dog was his anchor, the living, breathing proof that he was still connected to the world. He led Kaiser to a thick stone column near the entrance, partially sheltered from the wind. He knelt, looking the dog directly in the eyes. "I have to go in, boy," he whispered, his voice thick. "I need you to wait. You have to wait. I will be back, I promise." Kaiser let out a low, anxious whine, pressing his head hard against Luke's chest. Luke felt the dog's anxiety as if it were his own. He looped Kaiser's leash around the column, his hands shaking slightly. "Guard, wait." He stood and walked backward toward the doors, his heart pounding a sick rhythm. Kaiser sat rigid, his eyes locked on Luke until the heavy doors hissed shut between them. The transition was jarring. Luke stepped from the biting cold into a world of profound warmth, silence, and the soft, dry scent of old paper. Students sat at long oak tables, their faces illuminated by laptops. It was a different universe. Luke felt intensely visible. His worn leather jacket, his rough beard, the dirt under his fingernails. It all felt like a stain on the pristine quiet. He kept his head down, ignoring the librarian's polite but curious glance, and found the public computer terminals in a quiet alcove. He sat down, the chair surprisingly comfortable, and took a steadying breath. He was a ghost at the feast. He flexed his cold fingers and began the hunt. First, he searched for the victim. Jonathan Lawson, 1996, Pittsburgh. The library's digital archives were fast. He found the old newspaper clippings from the Post-Gazette. Tragic gas leak claims local activist. Investigation rules accidental. Community mourns John Lawson. The articles were brief, clinical, and final. They painted John as a well-meaning but perhaps careless man. The official narrative was exactly as Theo's letter had described, a clean, closed case. Next, he searched for the killer, Calvin Bishop. The screen flooded with results. It was a digital monument to a titan. The Bishop Corporation pledges $5 million to Children's Hospital. Calvin Bishop honored as Philanthropist of the Year. New Bishop Tower to reshape Pittsburgh's skyline. Luke felt a familiar cold sickness rising in his stomach. This was Alex Hunter on a grand scale. Bishop wasn't just a man. He was an institution shielded by a firewall of charity and civic goodwill. The man who had murdered John Lawson was now celebrated as the city's savior. The anger and futility of it made Luke's hands tremble. He thought of Dean. He thought of the lie that had buried his friend. This was the same lie, just written in marble and steel. He refocused. He was not here for the killer. He was here for the heir. He typed Audrey Lawson, Pittsburgh. He scrolled through several results, mostly obituaries or public records for people with the same name. Then he saw it. A recent article dated just 3 weeks prior from a small local community blog. The headline read, "Activist Audrey Lawson challenges Bishop Corporation's new riverfront project." Luke clicked the link, his heart hammering. The article showed a picture of a woman in her mid-30s with the same intelligent, determined eyes as the little girl in the photograph. She was standing at a podium pointing at a map. The article detailed how Audrey Lawson, head of a community advocacy group, was formally protesting Calvin Bishop's latest development. She claimed the corporation's environmental impact studies were flawed and that they were ignoring the risk to local neighborhoods. Luke stared at the screen. She was still here, and she was already fighting him. John Lawson's daughter had grown up to continue her father's war, never even knowing it was a war. She was facing the same enemy, armed only with facts, while Calvin Bishop held the bloody, hidden truth of what happened to her father. He had to reach her. He found the website for her organization. It had a Contact US page, a simple email form. Luke knew he couldn't use it. An email was traceable, insecure. It would be a digital flare, warning Bishop that someone was digging. He needed to do this the old way, the soldier's way. He observed the organization's office location, a modest suite in a downtown building. He then logged off the computer and proceeded to the library's small souvenir shop. He spent his remaining change on a single plain greeting card and a pre-stamped envelope. Settling at an unoccupied table in the main reading area, he took a deep breath and started writing. His handwriting was rugged, bearing a slant from his time in the military. He kept the message concise, impersonal, and pressing. "Miss Lawson, you are not acquainted with me. I have discovered an item that belonged to your father, Jonathan Lawson, dating back to 1996. This is a private matter of utmost significance. I believe it contains information he sought to safeguard before his passing. I am unable to transmit it electronically. I cannot deliver it to your office. It is not safe. If you wish to view this, you must meet me. I am undertaking a substantial risk by contacting you." He paused, deliberating. He needed to provide evidence that this was not a deception. He opened his backpack and carefully retrieved the small wooden box. He removed one photograph, the clearest one of John, holding a 6-year-old Audrey on his shoulders, both laughing. He also took a page from Theo's letter, not the section discussing the murder, but a paragraph concerning Jay's conviction in the Meridian Project. He went to the library's copy machine and produced a single, grainy copy of that page. He folded both the photocopy and the original photograph into the card. "I will be at Shenley Park by the main fountain near the cafe. This coming Saturday at 2 p.m. I will be wearing a brown leather jacket and will have a gray German Shepherd with me. Please come alone." He signed it simply, "A friend." He sealed the envelope and addressed it to Audrey Lawson, attention her organization's office. He exited the library's main doors, searching for Kaiser. The dog was precisely where he had left him, a shivering statue of gray fur, violently trembling from the cold but motionless, his eyes fixed on the door. The instant he saw Luke, Kaiser sprang to his feet, his entire body convulsing with relief. Luke knelt and buried his face in the dog's cold, rough fur, his promise fulfilled. Good boy, I'm here." He walked to the blue U.S. mailbox on the corner. He held the letter for a moment, the small white rectangle containing a 30-year-old secret. He slid it into the slot. The sound of the letter dropping into the dark metal box was soft, almost imperceptible. But to Luke, it felt as decisive as a declaration of war. The first move had been made. Now all they could do was wait and endure. The 3 days between mailing the letter and the scheduled Saturday meeting were a particular kind of torment for Luke. He and Kaiser bunkered down in the cold security office at the Meridian Steelworks, existing in a state of suspended animation. Luke conserved the last of their food, venturing out only once under the cloak of darkness to retrieve the heavy, locked metal box from its hiding place. He brought it back to the office where it sat in the corner, a dark, silent harbinger of either salvation or destruction. His mind replayed the mission briefs of his past. He was meeting an unknown contact in an exposed location with high-value intelligence. The scenario was agonizingly familiar. The old instincts, the hypervigilance of his PTSD, returned with renewed intensity. He didn't sleep. He sat with his back to the wall, listening to the wind howl through the skeletal structures of the steel mill, one hand resting on Kaiser's warm, breathing flank. The dog was his sole connection to the tangibility of the present. Saturday dawned, gray and unforgiving, the sky a low, bruised purple. At noon, Luke consumed his last rations. He fed Kaiser the remaining handful of kibble. "No matter what happens today, boy," Luke said softly, scratching the dog's ears. "Tonight, one way or another, I'll get you a real meal, I promise." Kaiser looked up at him, his amber eyes reflecting a deep, unwavering trust that Luke felt he had yet to earn. They departed the steelworks an hour early, taking a circuitous, broken path to Shenley Park. He needed to survey the objective. The park was windswept and nearly deserted. The large fountain, which he had designated as the meeting point, was dry, its stone basins covered with brown, frozen leaves. Luke kept his distance. He found a position on a slight elevation, partially concealed by a cluster of bare-branched oak trees about 50 yards away. This afforded him a clear view of the fountain, the nearby cafe, and the parking area. At 1:50 p.m., his heart began to beat with a heavy military rhythm. Kaiser, sensing the surge in his adrenaline, rose from his sitting position, his body suddenly rigid, his gaze mirroring Luke's. "It's all right," Luke murmured, though it was a falsehood. At 1:58 p.m., a utilitarian blue sedan pulled into the lot. A woman emerged. Luke's breath caught. It was her, Audrey Lawson. She was taller than he had anticipated, and she moved with a swift, impatient energy. She was in her mid-30s, dressed in a sensible dark wool peacoat, jeans, and sturdy boots. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked precisely like the activist depicted on the website, sharp, focused, and not a little intimidating. But as she drew nearer, Luke observed her father's eyes, the same intelligent, determined eyes from the photograph, though hers held a weariness Jay's had not. She stood by the fountain, her arms crossed, scanning the empty park. She was visibly tense, almost angry, as if expecting a trap or a waste of her time. "Okay, boy," Luke whispered. "Let's go." He stepped out from the trees. Kaiser moved at his left heel, a silent gray shadow. Audrey spotted them immediately. Her hand flew to her pocket, perhaps gripping her phone or keys. She took a half-step back, her suspicion emanating from her in palpable waves. Luke stopped about 10 feet away, holding up one hand, palm outward, in the universal gesture of non-aggression. "Ms. Lawson?" His voice was hoarse from disuse. "You're the one who sent the letter," she stated. It was not a question. Her eyes darted from Luke's weathered, bearded face to the powerful dog at his side, then back again. She was assessing him. "I am. My name is Luke Morgan. Thank you for coming." "You said you had something of my father's," she said, her voice sharp and clipped. "This isn't a good time for games. What is this?" Luke saw her bracing for a scam, a plea for money from a desperate man. He knew he had only one chance to penetrate her defenses. He kept his movements slow, unzipping his backpack and reaching inside. He pulled out the small, smooth wooden box. He did not hand it to her. He simply held it. "This belonged to him," Luke said. Audrey's eyes fixed on the box, her expression faltering. "And this," Luke continued, "was inside." He took out the original photograph, the one of a smiling John Lawson holding a laughing, pigtailed little girl on his shoulders. He held it out to her. She stared at the photo. Her professional mask, the hard shell of the activist, simply dissolved. Her breath caught in a small, sharp gasp. She stepped forward, her hand trembling as she took the small, faded square of paper. "My God," she whispered, her fingers tracing the image of her younger self. I don't have this one. I thought they were all lost in the fire." Her gaze snapped up to his, the suspicion replaced by a raw, desperate confusion. "Where did you get this?" "It was with this," Luke said. He handed her the folded, grainy photocopy of Theo Lawson's letter. She unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the unsteady handwriting, her brow furrowed. Luke watched her read the paragraph about the Meridian Steelworks, about her father's dream of remediating the poisoned land. Her face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks, and she swayed, putting a hand on the cold stone of the fountain to steady herself. She was connecting the words on the page to the fight she was currently waging. "Who are you?" she asked again, but this time it was a plea. "I found these," Luke said, his voice quiet. "They were hidden in an old storage unit. Your uncle, Theo Lawson. He wrote the letter. He hid everything." "My Uncle Theo." Audrey's voice cracked. The name seemed to wound her. He told us everything was gone. He told us to leave Pittsburgh. He said it wasn't safe." "He was afraid," Luke said. "He said your father was murdered." Audrey looked away, her gaze distant, staring at the dead leaves in the fountain. She was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different. The emotion was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity that chilled Luke more than the wind. "I knew it," she said. "I always knew it. My mother, until the day she died, she knew it wasn't an accident." She looked up, and for the first time, Luke felt she was truly seeing him. "Mr. Morgan, you have stepped into something you do not understand." "I think I do," Luke said, his mind recalling Alex Hunter. "It was a cover-up." "It's still a cover-up," Audrey corrected him, her voice intense. "I'm an activist. I run a community group. For the last 6 months, I have been the primary opposition to Calvin Bishop's new riverfront development." "The Bishop Corporation," Luke said, recalling the search results. "Yes, and they don't fight fair. I thought I was just being paranoid." She began to pace, rubbing her arms. "I've had strange clicks on my phone. My office has been broken into twice, but nothing was ever taken. Two of my biggest donors pulled their funding last month, citing unforeseen complications. They're watching me. I've known it. I felt it. She suddenly stopped and looked around the empty park, her eyes wide with a new dawning horror. Oh God, she breathed. They're watching me, which means they saw me meet you. They saw a homeless man, a man they can't identify, pass me a package in an open park. They don't know what we discussed, but they know we met. Luke's soldier instincts took over. His gaze swept the perimeter. The park was no longer a meeting place. It was an exposed field. We need to move. You don't understand, Audrey said, her voice rising. You are both now in peril. Kaiser, sensing her unease, emitted a low, soft whimper. Luke then placed a hand on his head. I possess the remainder, Luke declared, cutting through her mounting panic. The evidence? It rests within a metal box. It is secured with a lock. I have concealed it. It is safe. This revelation brought her to a halt. Evidence? Tangible proof? Theo's missive confirmed it. Ledgers, permits, the original deed to the Meridian Steelworks. Audrey's eyes widened. The deed? That was why he could never develop the property. It was not legally his. She took a deep, trembling breath, her mind clearly working swiftly. We cannot approach the authorities, she stated, her voice resolute. The letter made mention of corrupted officials. In this urban landscape, Bishop embodies the police force. They would confiscate the box, and you and I would vanish in one manner or another. She retrieved her phone, then paused, gazing at it intently. They are likely monitoring this too. She thrust it back into her pocket. We must depart. We require assistance. Who? Luke inquired. There is one individual, she replied. A single man whose name is Mac. Riley. She began to walk swiftly towards the parking lot, with Luke and Kaiser falling into step beside her. He is a former FBI agent, Audrey elaborated, her voice hushed and rapid. One of the finest. He was constructing a substantial case of public corruption beginning in 1999. He spent 2 arduous years investigating municipal officials, zoning board members, and he discovered the trail led directly to Calvin Bishop. What transpired? Luke asked. What do you surmise? His investigation was obstructed from within. His superiors reassigned his team, classified his evidence, and shut down his operation. They cited national security concerns post-2001, employing it as a pretext to suppress a local corruption inquiry. Mac recognized that Bishop was manipulating events. He resigned, but he did not do so quietly. He has been operating as a private security consultant ever since, patiently waiting. He despises Bishop. He's the only one I trust. Can he open the box? If it is capable of being opened, Mac can open it, she affirmed. They reached her vehicle. She looked at Luke, then at Kaiser. Enter, both of you. Luke did not hesitate. He opened the rear door. Kaiser. Jump. The large canine leaped onto the back seat. Luke climbed in after him, this being his first time in a private automobile in nearly a year. The pristine scent of the upholstery was disorienting. Audrey entered the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. She was staring at the small, faded photograph in her hand. He murdered my father, she whispered. Then, her voice hardening with the accumulated weight of 30 years of denied justice, she started the car. Let's go to Mr. Riley. Audrey drove with a focused, controlled fury. She handled the car not as an ordinary citizen, but as someone who had anticipated a crisis. Luke sat in the back, the substantial, warm presence of Kaiser pressed against his side. The dog's chin rested on the edge of the window, his gaze fixed forward, a silent co-pilot. Mac's office isn't adequately secure for this, Audrey stated, her eyes meeting Luke's in the rearview mirror. Not if they are observing me. We require the proof first. Where is it? The Meridian Steelworks, Luke said. Our shelter, the security office. Audrey's knuckles paled on the steering wheel. My father's mill. The words were heavy, uttered with a reverence that bordered on anguish. She turned the car towards the river, towards the skeletal remnants of her father's aspiration. She did not park near the main thoroughfare. She utilized an overgrown access lane, pulling the car behind a collapsed brick wall, concealing it from public view. "Remain here. Keep the engine running. I will be quick," Luke said. "No," Audrey responded, her voice resolute. "I am accompanying you. I need to witness it. It's not safe, not merely the structure. They are observing me, Mr. Morgan. The safest place for me is directly beside you, and I am not allowing that box out of my sight." Luke looked at her, recognizing the fortitude that must have characterized her father. He gave a single sharp nod. "Kaiser with me. Guard." He led the way, slipping through the same aperture in the fence he and Kaiser habitually used as an entrance. Audrey followed without hesitation, her eyes wide as she surveyed the cavernous, defunct foundry. The silence of the place was immense, interrupted only by the crunch of their boots on frozen debris. They reached the small brick security office. Luke pushed the door open, the sound of grinding metal echoing slightly. "It is in here," Luke said, stepping inside. And then he froze. Kaiser, who had been moving just ahead, halted abruptly in the doorway. The dog did not growl. He did not bark. He emitted a low, almost imperceptible rumble from deep within his chest. His body tensed, the fur along his spine bristling. Luke sensed a shift in the atmosphere. They were not alone. "Well, well," a voice remarked, smooth and self-assured. Two men emerged from the shadows at the side of the building, blocking their exit. They were not dressed for the cold. They wore expensive-looking wool coats, unbuttoned over dark suits. The one who spoke was in his 40s, with a smug, clean-shaven face that appeared as though he had just left an office. This was Nick Sullivan. He smiled, but it was a cold, thin expression. The other man, Eric Dalton, was built like a refrigerator. He was younger, silent, his gaze flat and vigilant. He was the muscle. "That is far enough," Sullivan said, his voice casual. He looked at Luke's worn jacket and rough beard with undisguised disdain. "This is private property. You are trespassing." "We were just departing," Audrey said, stepping forward, her voice sharp. Sullivan's smile broadened. "Ah, Miss Lawson, of course you are. We were wondering where you had absconded to. We observed you at the park. You have made a new acquaintance, I see." His eyes flicked back to Luke. "You are involving yourself in matters that do not concern you, old man. This mill, this city, it is not your affair, and Ms. Lawson is entwined in things that are far beyond her comprehension." Kaiser took one step forward, positioning himself between Luke and the men. The low rumble in his chest intensified, and he lifted his lip just enough to expose his teeth. Dalton, the large man, shifted his weight, his hand moving slightly inside his coat. "That is a fine dog," Sullivan said, his eyes narrowing. "It would be regrettable if something were to befall him." He took a step closer. "So here is the message from individuals of importance. You are finished. Erase your presence here from memory. Forget you ever encountered her. Retreat to whatever place from which you emerged. We will not reiterate." Luke did not move. He did not speak. He simply met Sullivan's gaze. His mind was clear, his training resurfacing. He assessed their stances, their hands, the escape routes. He recognized these men. They were not merely security personnel. They were the contemporary equivalent of hunters and forcers. This was the threat. This was the cover-up, actively unfolding right before him. "We are leaving," Luke said, his voice a low growl that nearly matched his dog's. "Yeah," Sullivan sneered. "You are." He gestured, and the two men moved aside, clearing the path. They were unaware of the box. This was merely an intimidation tactic, a warning shot. Luke seized Audrey's arm. Go now. He backed out of the office, Kaiser walking backward with him, his eyes never leaving the two men. Luke grabbed the heavy, locked metal box from the corner where he had left it. It was weighty, but his adrenaline rendered it weightless. They walked swiftly, not running, back through the derelict factory, the sound of their footsteps echoing. They did not look back until they were through the fence and back in the car. Luke tossed the box into the trunk, slammed it shut, and jumped into the back with Kaiser. Go, he commanded. Audrey did not require instructions. The car spat gravel as it spun onto the access road. They were here, Audrey said, her voice shaking, not with fear, but with fury. They were anticipating us. They knew you would come, Luke said grimly. They are observing you just as you stated, but they do not know what we possess. Not yet. Mac now, she said, her knuckles white. Mac. Riley's office was an inconspicuous warehouse in an industrial district situated between a plumbing supply company and a defunct tire depot. The sign on the door simply stated Riley and Associates Risk Management. Audrey used a key to grant them access through a side door. The interior was sparse, professional, and smelled of coffee and ozone. A man was waiting for them in the main office. This was Mac. Riley. He was in his early 60s, an African-American man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore a simple button-down shirt and a holster that was visible when he stood. He appeared to be what he was, a man who had departed the FBI, but whose FBI training had never departed him. Audrey, he said, his voice a calm baritone. He nodded to Luke, his eyes assessing him, then lowered to assess Kaiser. And company. Mac, this is Luke Morgan, Audrey said, her words tumbling out. Luke, this is Mac Riley. He found it, Mac. He found my father's evidence. Luke, still carrying the heavy box, stepped forward. They are aware of us. 2 of Bishop's men. They confronted us at the mill. Mac's calm expression did not change, but his eyes hardened. Bishop's men. Are you certain? Nick Sullivan and Eric Dalton, Luke said. A flicker of recognition crossed Mac's face. Bishop's personal errand boys, former police officers, both dishonorably discharged. They have been on his payroll for years. He looked at the box. So, it is true. Place it on the table. While Luke and Audrey explained the storage unit, the letter, and the confrontation at the mill, Mac examined the black metal box. He ran his fingers over the 3 combination locks. This is military grade, Mac said, his voice thoughtful. Late 80s or early 90s high-security tumbler locks. This is not amateur hour. John was serious about this. Can you open it? Audrey asked, her hands clasped so tightly her fingers were white. Mac permitted himself a small, thin smile. The Bureau instructs you on how to dismantle things, but it also instructs you on how to reassemble them. He went to a workbench and returned with a set of delicate tools and a stethoscope. Kaiser, meanwhile, had completed his thorough inspection of the office and settled down by the main entrance, facing outward, his head resting on his paws, serving as a self-appointed guardian. For the next 20 minutes, the sole audible sound within the warehouse was the faint metallic whisper of Max's tools and the gentle, rhythmic clicking of the combination dials. He operated with the precision of a surgeon, his ear pressed against the stethoscope. 1, he murmured, and the soft click of the first tumbler engaging reached his ears. He then shifted his focus to the second lock. More turning, more attentive listening followed. A quiet snick confirmed the fall of the second pin. The third lock proved to be the most challenging, occupying him for a solid 10 minutes. Luke and Audrey observed, almost holding their breath. Finally, Mac nodded, a sign of satisfaction. That's 3. He released the latches, and a heavy thud echoed through the room as the internal locking bar disengaged. He then looked at Audrey. It's your history, kid. You open it. Audrey stepped forward, her hands visibly trembling. She lifted the weighty lid. The contents were impeccably preserved. The air within the box was dry and carried the distinct sense of aged paper, leather, and typewriter ink. Mac began carefully removing the items one by one, placing them onto the table, handling each as if it were a precious artifact. "Item 1, he announced, presenting a thick, leather-bound journal. Audrey opened it, revealing her father's neat, technical handwriting filling the pages. A small, broken sound escaped her lips. "Item 2, Mac continued, pulling out a substantial folder. Meridian Zoning Permits, 1995. He fanned them out. All bore the official city seal. "These have to be the fakes." "Item 3, he said, producing 2 hard-backed accounting ledgers. "This is it, Audrey. This is the bribe money. It's all here. Payments, dates, shell companies." "And this," Luke interjected, pointing to the bottom. Mac reached in and retrieved the final item, a small black microcassette tape recorder. "My God," Audrey whispered. "He recorded him." As Mac meticulously examined the ledger, his back turned to the door. Kaiser's head suddenly perked up. The dog did not growl. Instead, he emitted a single, almost inaudible, high-pitched whine. Then he rose, the fur on his neck bristling, and a low, menacing rumble began in his chest. "Luke," Mac said without looking up. "The dog. Kaiser, what is it?" Luke was at the dog's side in an instant. Mac was already in motion. He traversed the room in 2 strides, approached a small, grimy window overlooking the street, and peered through a gap in the blinds. He remained still for a long moment. Then he let the blind fall. "Damn it," he whispered. "Audrey, you were right. You were followed, or I was." He looked at Luke, his face grim. Black sedan parked across the street, lights off. 2 occupants, Nick Sullivan and Eric Dalton. They know we're here. They know we're all together. And they know we have the box. He turned, his demeanor instantly shifting from an analyst's to a field agent's. "We have to split up. We have to move now." The world compressed into the confined, cold office within Mac Riley's warehouse. The sudden, terrifying realization that they were trapped, with Sullivan and Dalton waiting outside, seemed to drain the air from the room. Audrey let out a choked sound, her hand flying to her mouth. Luke did not flinch. He simply met Mac's gaze, his military composure enveloping him like a second skin. "They're watching the front," Mac said, his voice a low, urgent command. He was already moving, snatching the heavy metal box from the table. "They think we're all in here. They're waiting for us to panic." "What's the plan?" Luke asked, his voice steady. "We split," Mac said, shoving the ledgers and the journal back into the box and slamming the lid shut. The sharp, decisive click of the latches was final. "I'm the decoy. I'll take the box. I'll take my truck. They know it. They'll follow me. It's the only prize they care about." "And us?" Audrey asked, her voice trembling. "There's a service door at the end of the back alley. It opens onto a different street. You, Luke, and the dog go out that way. Quietly. Now. Where do we go?" "Anywhere but home," Mac said, his eyes hard. "Don't go to your apartment, Audrey. Don't use your phone. Don't use a credit card. They'll be tracking both. Go dark." "Where will we meet?" Luke asked, pulling on his backpack. "We won't. Not yet. I'm taking this box straight to Chloe, the lawyer. She's the only one in the city Bishop can't touch. She'll secure it. I'll contact her when I'm clear, and she'll find a way to contact you. Go, go." Mac moved towards the front door, the heavy box in one hand, his keys in the other. Luke grabbed Audrey's arm. "This way." He pulled her towards the back of the warehouse, Kaiser padding silently at his heels. They heard the sound of Mac's truck engine roaring to life, a defiant growl in the night. Almost immediately, it was followed by the sound of another engine, the black sedan, accelerating to follow. The decoy was working. They burst through the service door into a narrow, unlit alleyway, the air bitingly cold. The street at the far end appeared to be a mile away. "He got them," Audrey breathed, a hint of relief in her voice. "Not both of them," Luke said, stopping. "What?" "Listen." Audrey froze. Then she heard it. Not a car. The heavy, rhythmic sound of footsteps. Someone was running. A large man running hard, approaching up the main alley. "He must have dropped him off," Luke whispered, his voice grim. "Dalton, he's on foot. He's cutting us off." He glanced left, then right. The alley was a brick canyon. "This way," he hissed, pulling Audrey into a dark, narrow crevice between two buildings, a space filled with dumpsters. They pressed themselves into the shadows. Kaiser stood rigidly before them, motionless as a statue, making no sound. The running footsteps grew louder, a heavy, pounding cadence on the pavement. Eric Dalton ran straight past the mouth of their hiding place, his large silhouette disappearing towards the street Mac had taken. He was pursuing the truck. "We're clear," Audrey whispered, starting to move. "No," Luke said, holding her back. "Wait." He counted to 10, and then, as he had anticipated, the footsteps returned, slower this time. Dalton had realized his mistake. He was coming back, systematically checking the alleys. They were trapped. Dalton was at the T-junction, 50 yards away, scanning the darkness. Luke knelt beside Kaiser. He placed his hand on the dog's rough fur, his voice barely a whisper. "Kaiser, see him? Go, get him, go, boy, go." He pointed, not at the man, but down the other fork of the alley, the one that led away from their position. Kaiser understood immediately. He was not to attack. He was to divert. The big dog burst from the shadows, a gray streak in the darkness. He ran 20 yards down the opposite alley, stopped, and unleashed a sudden booming series of barks, a sound that exploded against the brick walls, echoing like a cannon shot. "There!" Dalton's voice was a rough shout. "The dog!" They heard his footsteps change direction, sprinting away from them, chasing the sound of the barks. "Now," Luke said, grabbing Audrey's hand. Go left, don't run, walk fast, don't look back." They moved, emerging from the gap and heading in the opposite direction, melting into the city's shadows. They didn't stop for nearly a mile. They traversed empty lots, skirted the edges of darkened parks, and remained deep within the industrial shadows. The adrenaline that had kept them warm began to dissipate, and the brutal reality of the Pittsburgh winter night took hold. Audrey, the strong-willed, articulate activist who had confronted corporations, was now simply a woman in a peacoat, freezing and on the run. She stumbled on a broken piece of pavement, and Luke caught her arm. She was shaking violently, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I can't," she stammered, her teeth chattering. "Luke, I'm so cold. My car, my apartment, I have nowhere to go." She looked at him, her eyes wide and desperate in the dim light of a distant street lamp. The power dynamic had completely reversed. She was no longer the one with the contacts in the car. She was the refugee. Luke's voice was calm, steady. "I know. We're exposed here. We need hard cover. We need to get inside." "Where?" she pleaded. "Where is safe?" Luke looked towards the river, towards the black skeletal silhouette of the Meridian Steelworks. "The one place they'll never look," he said. "The place they think we just ran from. We're going back to the mill." Audrey looked horrified. "Back there? With them?" "They're gone," Luke said. "They followed Mac. They think we're scattered. It's the last place they'll check. It's my ground. I know the layout. It's safe." She stared at him, her activist's fire extinguished, replaced by a cold, raw fear. She gave a small, defeated nod. "Okay." As if summoned, Kaiser appeared from the darkness, padding silently up to them, his mission complete. He nudged Luke's hand, then sensed Audrey's distress, and gently pushed his cold nose into her glove. The walk back to the mill was a long, cold misery. But this time, Luke was in the lead. He moved with purpose, his limp a steady rhythmic counterpoint to the howling wind. When they slipped back through the broken fence, the massive dead factory felt different. To Audrey, it was a terrifying graveyard, but to Luke, it was a fortress. He led her through the echoing darkness, his movements sure and quiet. He didn't need a flashlight. He navigated the debris fields and rusted machinery from memory. Audrey stumbled behind him, wincing at every sound. They reached the small, dark security office. It was a pocket of absolute cold. Audrey huddled against the wall, wrapping her arms around herself, her body shaking uncontrollably. It's colder in here than it was outside, she whispered. Sit, Luke said. His voice was no longer that of a homeless man. It was the quiet, confident command of a sergeant. Against that wall, it's the most insulated. He gestured to the dog. Kaiser, watch her. Kaiser, understanding the shift in his human's tone, immediately lay down, pressing his large, thick-furred body against Audrey's legs. She expelled a short, sharp breath. As the dog's warmth permeated her, Luke began his work. He moved with an efficiency that captivated her. He retrieved a rusted metal drum from the corner and hauled it to the room's center. He exited the office and reappeared moments later with an armful of dry, splintered wood from a broken pallet he had eyed weeks prior, along with a handful of balled-up, dry shipping manifests from the desk. He constructed a small, structured blaze inside the barrel, a safe, contained column of fuel. He struck a single waterproof match from his pack and ignited the paper. A tiny orange flame caught, flickered, then swelled, casting dancing, wavering shadows on the walls. It was a minuscule spark of vitality in the massive, lifeless building. Audrey watched him, her chattering teeth gradually subsiding. He wasn't merely surviving, he was operating. He unzipped his backpack. He withdrew his small, soot-blackened cookpot and a bottle of water. He also pulled out a small foil-wrapped packet. It's not much, he said, his voice hushed. It's a high-energy ration bar, military issue. You need to eat. He broke the dense bar in half and offered it to her. What about you? She asked, her voice faint. What about Kaiser? We're fine, he stated. Eat. She ate. It was dry and tasted of sawdust and peanuts, but it was the most delicious thing she had ever consumed. The warmth from the fire in the barrel, the heat from the dog by her side, and the energy from the food began to dispel the deep, penetrating chill from her bones. She looked at Luke. He sat on the floor opposite her, gazing into the fire, his profile sharp and focused in the orange light. He was vigilant, his eyes sweeping the doorway every few seconds. Yet, he was not anxious. He was in complete command of this hostile, shattered environment. In that moment, Audrey Lawson no longer perceived a homeless man. She no longer saw a victim or a project. She saw a soldier. She saw a man of immense capability and quiet, profound dignity. A man who, with nothing, had just provided her with warmth, sustenance, and security. A man who possessed more honor in his weathered, calloused hands than Calvin Bishop had in his entire polished empire. A deep, unshakable respect settled over her. You knew exactly what to do, she said, her voice soft. Luke did not look up from the fire. In the service, you learn to make a home out of whatever you've got. You learn to watch, and you learn to wait. Thank you, Luke, she said, the words feeling small and inadequate. For all of this. He gave a single small nod. Kaiser let out a low, contented sigh and rested his heavy head on Audrey's lap, trusting her. The three of them sat in the small, cold office, illuminated by the flickering fire, a tiny, defiant island of life in the heart of the shadow, waiting for the dawn. The fire in the barrel had reduced to cold gray ash. The faint light of dawn found Luke and Audrey huddled in the security office, stiff, exhausted, and covered in grime. Kaiser, who had kept an unwavering vigil between them all night, let out a low, soft whine, sensing the transition from darkness to day. Audrey looked at Luke. The shared fear and the strange, Spartan safety of the night had forged a bond between them. The gratitude and respect she felt was a solid, tangible thing. "What now, Luke?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Now," Luke said, his own voice hoarse from the cold. "We take back the fight." They did not have to wait long. At precisely 7 a.m., an inconspicuous gray van pulled up to the collapsed loading dock near their fence gap. The driver's door opened and Mac Riley stepped out. He gave a short, sharp whistle. Kaiser's ears shot up and he looked at Luke. "He's clear," Luke said, relief washing over him. "Let's go." They slipped out of the mill. Mac, looking tired but energized, met them at the fence. He didn't smile. "Sullivan and Dalton followed me halfway across the state," Mac said, his voice low. "I lost them in the early morning traffic near the stadiums, but they know they're hunting." He looked at them, his eyes sharp. "Good. Let them." He opened the side door of the van. "Get in, both of you." Kaiser hopped in the back. Luke helped Audrey, who was stiff from the cold, and climbed in after her. "Where are we going?" Audrey asked. "The only fortress we have left," Mac said. "My lawyer's office." Mac drove them not to a towering glass skyscraper, but to a discreet historical brownstone in a quiet part of the city. The brass plaque on the door simply read, C.L. Park, Attorney at Law. The door was opened by a woman who was the physical antithesis of the chaotic night they had just endured. This was Chloe. She was in her late 40s, of Asian descent, and wore an impeccably tailored gray suit, her black hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were sharp, analytical, and missed nothing. She was the very definition of competence. "Mac?" She nodded, stepping aside. "Audrey, Mr. Morgan." Her gaze lingered on Luke for a moment, taking in his worn leather jacket and the deep exhaustion in his face, then flicked to Kaiser. "He's well behaved, I trust." "He's a guard, not a pet," Luke said quietly. "Good." Chloe led them into a large conference room. The heavy, locked metal box sat in the center of a polished mahogany table, looking like an ancient relic in a modern setting. A man was standing by the window, coffee cup in hand. He was younger than Luke expected, perhaps mid-30s, with a rumpled shirt, restless energy, and the skeptical eyes of a man who had heard every lie. "This is Jake Miller," Chloe said by way of introduction. "He's the best investigative reporter in this city and the only one I trust." Jake nodded at them. "This is a hell of a story if it's true." "It's true," Audrey said, her voice finding its strength. "That's what we're here to prove," Chloe said, taking her seat at the head of the table. "Good morning, Mac. Mr. Miller and I have been busy while you were unavailable." She gestured to the table. "The original box is here. It is also now on a secure server with copies in 3 different states. The ledgers, the journal, everything. The microcassette is currently with a forensic audio specialist. We should have the restored file by tomorrow." She then folded her hands. "But I didn't wait. Using the names from John Lawson's journal, I started making calls. It turns out your father wasn't the only accident connected to Bishop's projects." In the late 1990s, Audrey looked up, her face pale. "What?" 6 other men all died in unforeseen accidents on Bishop-related sites between 1996 and 1998. I have already been in contact with a representative for 3 of those families, a woman named Anna Parker. She is very motivated to join our civil suit. Audrey looked stunned. This was no longer just about her father. It was a conspiracy. As if on cue, Chloe's desk phone emitted a soft, polite chime. Her assistant's voice came over the intercom. "Ms. Park, I have a Mr. Chris on line 1. He says he's counsel for the Bishop Corporation." A heavy silence fell over the room. Luke looked at Mac. Mac just nodded, his face grim. They were faster than he thought. Chloe pressed the speakerphone button. "This is Chloe. To whom am I speaking?" A voice smooth as oiled glass filled the room. "Good morning, Ms. Park. My name is Chris. I represent the interests of Mr. Calvin Bishop. It has come to our attention that you are in possession of some archival materials belonging to his organization. My client is a reasonable man. He understands that misunderstandings happen. He has requested a brief informal meeting to discuss rectifying this situation." "I'm not sure we have anything to discuss, Mr. Chris," Chloe said, her voice like ice. "Oh, I think you do," the lawyer purred. "My client is prepared to make a very generous offer to Ms. Lawson for her father's personal effects. Shall we say 10 a.m. at our office?" "No," Chloe said instantly. "My office, 10 a.m., and your client must be present, not just his lawyers." There was a pause on the line. "That is unusual, but I will convey your request. See you at 10 CO. The line clicked, followed by a dial tone. Jake Miller, the reporter, looked like he'd just been handed the story of the year. Audrey was shaking. "He wants to buy us off." "He wants to know what we have," Mac corrected her. "And who we are." Luke said nothing, but his hand unconsciously clenched into a fist. He was finally going to meet him, the man in the tower, the Alex Hunter of Pittsburgh. At precisely 10 SA, the conference room doors opened. 3 men entered. The man in the lead was Calvin Bishop. He was an older man, perhaps 80, but he was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark, custom-tailored suit, and moved with the slow, assured vigor of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. He had a full head of white hair and the calm, almost kind eyes of a philanthropist. He was the man whose name was on hospitals. Behind him was Chris, the lawyer, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. And behind him was a younger man in his late 20s, his suit sharp and modern, his eyes nervous. This was Ben Bishop, the grandson, the heir apparent to the Bishop Corporation. He looked less like a conspirator and more like a modern CEO who was deeply uncomfortable with this entire messy analog situation. Luke stared at Calvin Bishop. He saw the kind eyes, the confident posture, the aura of untouchable authority, and all he could see was Captain Alex Hunter. He saw the man who had signed a paper and turned his friend Dean's death into a lie. His blood ran cold. Kaiser, who was lying under the table at Luke's feet, let out a single low growl, sensing the wave of cold fury coming off his human. "Ms. Park, Ms. Lawson," Bishop said, his voice a practiced grandfatherly baritone. He nodded to Mac. "Mr. Riley, it has been a long time." He then looked at Luke. The kind eyes vanished. His gaze swept over Luke's worn jacket and weathered face with a flicker of analytical dismissal. This variable was the source of the issue. "Please sit," Chloe stated, withholding coffee. Chris, the legal counsel, commenced. "As previously stated, my client, Mr. Bishop, cherishes the heritage of this city. He was a contemporary of Mr. Lawson. He profoundly regrets the misfortune and desires to alleviate Ms. Lawson's burden. We are prepared to tender $8 million for your father's personal effects and a comprehensive confidentiality clause." Audrey, who had remained silent, then spoke. Her voice was clear and unwavering. "My father's memory is not for sale." Calvin Bishop offered a patient, condescending smile. "My dear, this is an old misunderstanding of 30 years. Documents get lost. Narratives become confused. This presents an opportunity for everyone to emerge whole." "No one departs unscathed from this chasm, Mr. Bishop," Chloe interjected. She propelled a replica of John Lawson's journal across the table. "We possess the ledgers. We possess the permits. We are aware of the payoffs." Chris scoffed. "Circumstantial. The declarations of a deceased individual. It will never withstand scrutiny." "Then perhaps," Chloe proposed, "you're more concerned about the living. I have been retained by Anna Parker." The name resonated on the table like a grenade. Luke observed Ben Bishop, the grandson, recoil. Chris, the attorney, lost his composure. Anna Parker, Chloe continued, serves as the representative for the families of the 6 other men who perished on your sites. She is immensely keen to have her day in court. I imagine Mr. Miller here will be equally eager to report on it. Calvin Bishop's benevolent facade finally fractured. His gaze hardened into steel. You. And then there's the audio recording, Chloe concluded. The recording of your meeting with John Lawson 3 days before his demise. The one where you discussed the cover-up. A profound silence enveloped the room. Calvin Bishop stared at Chloe, his face a mask of cold fury. He had been completely outwitted. It was Ben, the grandson, who ultimately broke the quiet. He was pallid, his eyes darting between Chloe and his grandfather. He wasn't dwelling on the past. He was focused on the stock market. "Grandfather," Ben uttered, his voice hushed and pressing, his MBA-trained mind rapidly calculating. The media, the other families, a criminal investigation. This isn't merely a lawsuit. This is an extinction-level event. Our stock will be worthless by noon. "Be silent, Ben," Calvin snapped. "No," Ben insisted, standing. "I will not. This is my company too, my future. If that story breaks, Bishop becomes a toxic name. We are ruined." He regarded Chloe, not from a moral standpoint, but with pure pragmatism. "What do you desire?" Chloe smiled. "My client seeks the truth. A full public acknowledgement of your involvement in the safety violations and the subsequent cover-up that led to the deaths of Jonathan Lawson and the other 6 men. The establishment of a $20 million compensation fund for the affected families and a $30 million endowment for a new city fund dedicated to workplace safety, named in honor of the victims." "Impossible," Chris, the lawyer, blustered. "It's that," Jake Miller commented softly from the corner. "Or my story appears on the front page tomorrow. The choice is yours." Ben Bishop looked at his grandfather. "Mitigate the damage, sir," he implored. "It's the only viable option we have left. We must control the narrative." Calvin Bishop reclined in his chair. He appeared defeated. Not by justice, Luke realized. Not by morality. He was vanquished by business. He had been cornered by financial realities. He stared at Luke, at Audrey, at Mac. His eyes were no longer benevolent. They were filled with an unadulterated, profound hatred for those who had unearthed this from the past. "Draft the agreement," Calvin Bishop instructed his lawyer, his voice a lifeless monotone. "We will sign it." The silence that followed Calvin Bishop's surrender was more profound and weighty than any sound. It was the reverberation of a 30-year burden being settled, of a specter finally being acknowledged. Calvin Bishop, a man who had once been a pillar of the city, for the first time appeared as he truly was. A frail, bitter old man. His grandson Ben was already on the phone with their public relations team, his voice a low, urgent monotone, speaking in the dispassionate language of damage control and managed narratives. Luke, Audrey, and Mac watched as Chloe, the attorney, slid the finalized settlement across the polished mahogany table. Bishop's hand, gripping the expensive pen, remained steady. He affixed his signature with a sharp, angry finality. It was not the signature of a penitent man. It was the signature of a monarch abdicating. The moment it was done, Bishop and his team departed without a further word. Jake Miller, the reporter, glanced at the remaining group. He had his story. "It runs tomorrow," he announced, giving a respectful nod to Audrey and Luke. "Thank you." The following morning, the city awoke to a transformed reality. The front page of the Post-Gazette, in bold, stark type, declared, "The Meridian Betrayal. Bishop admits 30-year cover-up. 6 deaths linked to fraud." Jake Miller's article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. It exposed everything. The purported accidental death of Jonathan Lawson in 1996, the fabricated environmental reports, the bribed officials, the 6 other families represented by Anna Parker who had suffered loss. and at the core of it, the quiet discovery of a concealed metal box by a local veteran. Luke read the account from a newspaper he purchased with a $5 bill Mac had pressed into his hand. He sat on a cold bench, the city bustling to life around him, with Kaiser at his feet. He saw Calvin Bishop's photograph, the same philanthropic smile now appearing like a grotesque mask. He thought of Alex Hunter. He thought of Dean. He felt no elation, no triumph, only the quiet, heavy click of a lock finally engaging. It marked the conclusion of a conflict he hadn't realized he was still waging. The repercussions were immediate and devastating. As Ben Bishop had predicted, the name was toxic. The Bishop Corporation's stock plummeted. The city council convened an emergency session to scrutinize every contract Bishop had ever executed. The university and the hospital, their reputations now tainted by association, announced they would be removing Bishop's name from their wings and halls. The empire, constructed on falsehoods and concealed deaths, disintegrated under the weight of the truth. Justice, it turned out, was not merely a moral triumph. It was a financial cataclysm. Weeks elapsed. The biting cold of winter began to recede, supplanted by the damp, muddy promise of spring. Luke and Kaiser remained at the Meridian Steelworks. It continued to be their sanctuary, but its essence had shifted. They were no longer hiding. They were safeguarding. Mac and Audrey visited regularly, bringing provisions, supplies, and for Kaiser, substantial bags of premium kibble. The gaunt hunger that had defined them was gone. One brisk March afternoon, Audrey arrived, not solely for a visit. She discovered Luke reinforcing the security office door, a task he was performing with meticulous, practiced skill. "Luke," she said, her voice vibrant with an energy he hadn't perceived before. "Audrey." He nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. Kaiser trotted over, greeting her with a respectful nudge of his nose. "The settlement is finalized," she announced. "The funds for the families, including Anna Parker's, have been transferred. The compensation is complete." "That's good," Luke responded. "That's right." "And the land," she continued, surveying the vast, rusting yard. "The former Meridian Steelworks, my father's mill. It is officially, unequivocally mine." She took a deep breath. "The developers are circling, of course. They see acres of prime riverfront property. They're offering a fortune to acquire it from me." "You're going to sell?" Luke inquired. It was the logical course of action. "No," Audrey declared, a fierce, bright smile gracing her face. "I'm not. I'm going to complete what my father initiated." Luke gazed at her, bewildered. "I'm utilizing the settlement money, the funds Calvin Bishop paid in his own name, to redevelop this locale," she explained, her arms sweeping wide. "I'm not constructing condominiums. I'm building a community, affordable housing for working families, a public green space, a community support center." She then turned, her expression softening, and looked directly at Luke. "And a dedicated wing for veteran support services, a place for men and women like you who were promised one thing and received another." Luke was stunned. He could only stare at her. That's a good thing, Audrey. That's a noble memorial." "It's not a memorial, Luke," she corrected. "It's a future, but I cannot accomplish it alone. It's an immense undertaking. I require someone to manage this site, someone to oversee the redevelopment, the maintenance, the security, someone who already understands this place, who knows its core, someone who knows how to keep things functional, how to construct something from nothing, how to ensure people's safety." She took a step closer. "I need someone I trust." Luke's heart pounded. He looked down at his worn, soiled clothing. "Audrey, I'm a homeless man. I don't know anything about "Stop," she interrupted, her voice firm yet imbued with kindness. "Don't you dare utter that. I am not offering you charity, Luke. I am offering you a job." She touched his arm. "I will never forget that night in the alley or in this office. I'm an activist. I'm accustomed to discussing, to contending with words. But when we were in genuine peril, when I was freezing and disintegrating, you were in command. You were calm. You were a soldier. You built a fire. You secured the perimeter. You managed the crisis. You protected me. That is the man I desire to manage this property. I am offering Sergeant Luke Morgan the position of Head of Management and Maintenance for the Meridian Community Project. Luke looked at her, and for the first time in years, he felt a sharp, burning sensation behind his eyes. He perceived the respect in her face. It was not pity. It was a job offer from one professional to another. He had been a phantom for so long, he had forgotten what it felt like to be recognized. He cleared his throat, the words thick and unfamiliar. Yes, I accept. 6 months later,